Don't touch that page unless you know whose name is on it. The warning came from Captain Emily Carter in a voice so quiet that half the room almost missed it, but Lieutenant Ryan Walker heard every word. He had just tossed her field journal across the concrete floor of the training classroom at Fort Bragg, and the old notebook slid under the front row of chairs like something worthless. Its leather cover hit the leg of a desk, folded open, and scattered 3 loose pages across the gray floor. One of them carried a faded corner stain. Another held a pressed strip of desert grass taped beside a date. The third landed face down near Ryan's polished boot. For a moment, no one moved. The classroom had been loud seconds earlier, full of young officers joking over coffee, checking phones, and pretending not to be nervous about the combat leadership assessment scheduled for that morning. Now the only sound was the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant crackle of a loudspeaker outside. Emily stood beside the last table in the room, her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture straight, her face unreadable. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look angry. That made the silence heavier. Ryan gave a short laugh, the kind men used when they realized they had gone too far, but wanted the room to believe they had meant every bit of it. "It's a notebook, Captain," he said, glancing around for support. Not a flag. A few officers shifted in their seats. Nobody laughed this time. Emily's eyes stayed on the open journal. She was 34, maybe 35, with fair skin weathered by long days outdoors, light brown hair pulled into a regulation bun, and blue-gray eyes that seemed older than the rest of her face. She wore no dramatic decorations, no loud reminder of rank beyond what the uniform required. The only thing that drew attention was a small custom patch stitched above the flap of her field bag, a silver hawk over a folded American flag. Most of the officers had noticed it when she walked in. None of them knew what it meant. Ryan Walker stood at the center aisle, tall, clean-cut, confident in the way young officers sometimes were before experience had taken its first payment. His last name carried weight on the base. His father, Master Sergeant Thomas Walker, had been spoken of in careful tones for years, the kind reserved for men whose final missions were sealed behind black ink and official silence. Ryan had grown up beneath that shadow and mistook it for armor. When Emily entered the classroom that morning and chose the back table without introducing herself, he had decided she was another staff officer sent to observe. When she opened that worn journal and began writing while the others reviewed tactical maps, he mistook her quiet for weakness. Emily took one step forward. The sole of her boot stopped an inch from the fallen page near Ryan's foot. "Don't step on it," she said. This time, everyone heard her. Ryan looked down, then back at her, his jaw tightening. "You keep memories in there?" he asked. "Lessons," Emily answered. "Names." The word changed something in the room, though Ryan did not understand why. Emily bent down, not quickly, not dramatically, and picked up the first page. Then the second. Her fingers paused over the third, the one closest to Ryan. For the briefest second, her hand trembled, so slightly that only the instructor near the wall seemed to notice. Ryan saw it too, and misread it. "Real soldiers don't need diaries to remember what they did," he said. Emily lifted her eyes to him. There was no challenge in them, no anger sharp enough to give him something to fight. Only a tired steadiness that made him feel, for the first time that morning, like he had spoken in a room where the walls knew more than he did. "No," she said softly. "They keep them so others won't forget what they owed." Emily Carter finished gathering the loose pages without asking Ryan to move. She slipped each one back into the journal in a careful order, aligning the corners as if the paper deserved the same precision as a folded flag. Then she returned to her seat at the back of the classroom and placed the notebook flat beside her right hand. She did not open it again. That bothered Ryan more than any argument would have. The other officers slowly returned to their maps and training packets, but the air had changed. They were still watching her without turning their heads. Emily had that effect on rooms. She did not command attention by raising her voice. She pulled silence toward her, made people aware of their own breathing, their own posture, their own carelessness. In the hard white light of the classroom, she looked almost ordinary at first glance. Average height, lean build, clean uniform, no effort to appear impressive. But the longer someone looked, the more the details began to separate her from everyone else. Her boots had been polished, then worn, then polished again, The leather creased from miles of field use rather than hallway inspections. Her left wrist carried a thin, pale scar that vanished beneath her sleeve. Her hands were steady but not soft. They looked like hands that had tightened tourniquets, repaired radios, carried stretchers, and written letters no one wanted to receive. The silver hawk patch on her field bag caught the light whenever she shifted. It was simple, almost plain, a bird in flight above a folded American flag, stitched in gray thread with a narrow dark border. One captain across the room leaned toward another and whispered, "What unit is that?" The other officer shook his head. Emily heard them. She always heard more than people expected. She had learned that skill years earlier in places where the first warning was not a shout, but a change in the wind, a pause in a conversation, a radio going quiet 1 second too long. She kept her face calm and her eyes on the training board as Major Daniel Reeves entered from the side door. Reeves was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried naturally and a manner that allowed no wasted movement. He glanced once at Emily's journal, once at Ryan, and said nothing about either. That silence was not permission. It was a note saved for later. "This morning's exercise is leadership under pressure," Reeves said. "You will not be graded on how loud you sound. You will be graded on whether people are still willing to follow you when the plan changes." Ryan straightened slightly, eager to recover the room. Leadership was his strength, or at least the part of himself he trusted most. He had grown up around framed photographs, memorial plaques, folded uniforms, and men who lowered their voices whenever his father's name was mentioned. He had mistaken reverence for inheritance. Across the room, Emily opened her packet and read the scenario without expression. A simulated night movement, limited visibility, one communication failure, one casualty role player, and a timed extraction across 300 yards of wooded training ground. It was the kind of problem young officers like to solve with confidence and arrows on a laminated map. Emily studied it differently. Her eyes paused not on the route, but on the gaps, the delays, the assumptions no one had tested. Ryan caught her looking and gave a thin smile, as if inviting another confrontation. Emily simply lowered her gaze to the page. She was not there to defeat him. That was what he still did not understand. She was there because some lessons arrived before Pride was ready to receive them. Major Reeves divided the officers into 2 teams and handed Ryan Walker the command card for the first run. The choice seemed to restore him immediately. His shoulders squared, his voice sharpened, and the small embarrassment from the classroom faded behind the familiar comfort of being in charge. He stepped to the front map board and began moving magnetic markers across the laminated terrain sheet with quick, decisive motions. "We move in 2 elements," he said. "Alpha takes the left tree line. Bravo holds the shallow ridge. We keep the casualty team in the center and push straight through the objective lane." It sounded clean. It sounded confident. It also depended on everything going exactly as expected. Emily remained near the back wall with the observers, arms relaxed, field journal tucked under one hand. She did not challenge him. She watched the way his fingers skipped over the low ground near the creek bed, the way he assigned his least experienced officer to the rear security position, the way he treated the simulated communication failure as an inconvenience instead of the center of the problem. Major Reeves saw her eyes move, but still said nothing. The classroom portion ended 10 minutes later, and the group stepped outside into the cold Carolina morning. The training lane sat beyond a gravel road and a stand of pine trees, 300 yards of uneven ground laid out to test decision-making more than strength. Fog hung low between the trunks. Orange markers showed boundaries. A role player in a training vest waited near a mock supply crate, pretending to be the casualty that would complicate the mission. Ryan gathered his team and spoke with the polished rhythm of someone who had practiced leadership in mirrors, formations, and family expectations. "Stay tight, follow my hand signals, and do not overthink it," he told them. "Speed keeps people alive." Emily's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the journal. Speed had its place. So did patience. The field had taught her that the hard way. Over years of calls that came through broken radios, maps that were wrong by 50 yards, and young leaders who believed forward was the same as safe. The whistle blew. Ryan moved first, leading with energy, cutting across the open stretch toward the center route. His team followed, boots pressing into damp grass, breath showing in faint white clouds. At first, Everything looked efficient. The officers moved well enough, low and focused, making the kind of progress that pleased people who judged only the first minute of a problem. Then the exercise changed. One instructor raised a red flag from the tree line, signaling that the planned route was no longer available. Another called out that the radios had failed. The casualty role player dropped to one knee and announced a simulated leg injury. Ryan paused for half a second, just long enough for doubt to enter, then forced it out with volume. "Keep moving," he ordered. "We will deal with it at the rally point." The team hesitated. The casualty looked at him, waiting for direction. One officer glanced back toward Emily, not for permission, but because her stillness had become strangely reassuring. Ryan saw the glance and mistook it for disloyalty. "Eyes on me," he snapped. "This is not a committee." Emily stood outside the lane, silent, but the morning seemed to narrow around her. She could see the mistake forming before the others could name it. Ryan was preserving momentum at the cost of the person he was supposed to protect. It was a training injury, a scenario on a cold morning in North Carolina, but to Emily the pattern was old. A leader in a hurry. A wounded man treated like a delay. A promise waiting to be broken. Major Reeves folded his arms and let the failure continue. Ryan pushed the team another 20 yards, then another 30, until the formation stretched too thin and the rear element lost sight of the center. The instructors called out new complications. Limited visibility. Confusion on the left flank. Casualty condition worsening. Ryan turned in place, trying to solve everything at once, and for the first time that day his confidence sounded like noise. Emily lowered her eyes to the journal in her hand. Her thumb rested against the worn cover, right over the silver hawk stamped faintly into the leather. She had not planned to step in. She had promised herself she would observe, evaluate, and stay professional. But promises had weight, and some names carried more weight than orders. When the casualty role player called out again, Emily finally moved. Emily crossed the boundary rope without asking for permission, and the entire training lane seemed to slow around her. She did not run. She moved with purpose, cutting through the fog and damp grass in a straight line toward the center of the broken formation. Ryan turned as soon as he saw her enter the lane, irritation flashing across his face. "Captain Carter, this is my evaluation," he said. Emily did not stop. "Then lead like it," she answered. The words were not loud, but they carried through the trees. Two officers in Ryan's team froze where they stood. The role player on the ground looked up, still holding his simulated injury card against his vest. Emily knelt beside him, checked the tag, and scanned the terrain in one smooth motion. Her hand signals came next, sharp and simple. "You, take rear security. You, move 10 yards right and watch the creek bed. You, get his pack off and keep him talking." Nobody crosses the open lane. No one questioned her. Even Ryan's own team obeyed before they realized they were doing it. That was the first thing that unsettled him. Emily had not demanded control. She had simply become the safest voice in the woods. Major Reeves watched from the observer line, his expression unreadable, but his eyes stayed fixed on the officers who had shifted from confusion to focus in less than 15 seconds. Emily looked at the casualty role player. "Name, rank, and hometown," she said. "Second Lieutenant Mark Ellis, Springfield, Missouri," he replied, staying in character. "Good," Emily said. "Keep saying it every 30 seconds until we are clear." Ryan stepped closer, his pride fighting with the obvious fact that the exercise was stabilizing under someone else's command. "We were supposed to move fast," he said. Emily glanced at him for only a moment. Fast is not the same as organized. She pointed toward the low ground he had ignored during planning. "That creek bed gives cover, but it slows the carry. The ridge gives speed, but exposes the team. We use both. 2 carry, 2 screen, 1 counts time, 1 watches the left marker. You move last because you lost the picture first." The sentence landed harder than a reprimand because it was accurate. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Emily turned back to the team. "On my count. Stand him carefully. 3 steps, pause. 3 steps, pause." Nobody rushes. They moved. The fog swallowed their boots first, then their legs, then the lower half of their uniforms as they guided the role player across the uneven ground. Emily stayed beside the carry team, one hand near the casualty's shoulder, the other marking the route. She corrected angles with a touch, redirected panic with a look, and kept her voice steady enough that even the breathing of the group began to match her rhythm. 30 yards from the rally point, an instructor called out another complication. Route blocked. Ryan flinched. Emily did not. Shift right, she said immediately. Use the pine line. Keep the pace. Do not bunch up. The team adjusted without stopping. A minute earlier, they had looked like 6 separate officers waiting for orders. Now they moved like one unit. Ryan followed at the rear, forced to watch what real command looked like when it was stripped of performance. No speeches. No ego. No need to remind anyone who held authority. When they reached the rally marker, Emily guided the role player down, checked the final tag, and stepped back before the instructors could even call time. Major Reeves looked at his stopwatch. 48 seconds faster than the standard, he said. The officers stared at Emily. Ryan stared at the ground. Emily picked up her field journal from where she had set it on a dry patch of grass and tucked it under her arm. She did not celebrate. She only looked at Ryan and said, "The person slowing you down is sometimes the reason you still have a team." The training lane ended with the sharp sound of Major Reeves calling the exercise closed, but no one moved with the easy relief that usually followed a completed evaluation. The officers stood in the fog with their notebooks tucked under their arms, their faces caught between respect and discomfort. They had all seen the same thing. Ryan Walker had entered the lane as the appointed leader, and Emily Carter had walked out of it as the person everyone trusted when the plan fell apart. Ryan removed his gloves slowly, buying time to decide what kind of man he wanted to appear to be. Pride told him to challenge her. Common sense told him not to. He looked at the role player, then at the officers who had followed Emily without hesitation, then at the old journal under her arm. The notebook bothered him again. It sat against her uniform like a sealed door, plain and worn, yet somehow heavier than the gear around it. That was a training lane, Ryan said finally. His voice was calmer than before, but the edge remained. Controlled environment. Colored markers. Instructors. Nobody was in real danger. Emily looked at him the way an experienced soldier looked at a map with one missing road. "That is exactly why you were supposed to get it right," she said. A few officers lowered their eyes. Major Reeves let the words stand. Ryan swallowed, his face tightening. He had heard corrections before. He had been yelled at by instructors, challenged by peers, pushed by commanders who expected more from a walker. But Emily did not push like them. She did not seem interested in winning. That made her harder to dismiss. "You speak like you have seen every mistake before it happens," he said. Emily shifted the journal from one arm to the other. "Not every mistake." Her eyes moved briefly toward the pine line, where the fog clung to the branches in thin gray ribbons. Just enough of them. The group started walking back toward the classroom in pairs and quiet clusters. Ryan stayed a few steps behind Emily, caught between anger and curiosity. From behind, she looked even less like the stories he had been raised on. There was no theatrical toughness, no need to fill the morning with war stories. Her stride was even. Her shoulders stayed level. The silver hawk patch on her field bag rose and fell with each step, the folded flag beneath it stitched so small that most people would miss it unless they were close. Ryan found himself staring at it. "What is that patch?" he asked. Emily did not turn around. "A promise." "To who?" She stopped at the gravel road and looked back at him. For the first time all morning, something crossed her face that was not discipline or patience. It was grief, controlled so tightly that it almost looked like calm. "To people who trusted me when they had no reason left to trust anyone." Ryan had no answer for that. They returned to the classroom with damp boots and colder hands. The officers took their seats more carefully than before. Nobody joked over coffee now. Nobody touched Emily's journal. She set it beside her packet, closed and squared to the edge of the table. Ryan sat 2 rows ahead, staring at the front board while Major Reeves began the debrief. The major reviewed the route, the communication failure, the ignored casualty, the broken spacing, and the recovery. He did not raise his voice once. That made every mistake sound cleaner, sharper, harder to escape. "Leadership is not volume," Reeves said. "It is responsibility under pressure. Lieutenant Walker, you had control of the team until the first unexpected change. After that, you protected the plan more than the people." Ryan nodded once, stiffly. "Yes, sir." Then Reeves looked toward the back of the room. "Captain Carter protected the people first. That is why the plan became useful again." Emily did not react. Ryan finally turned in his chair. His eyes dropped to the journal on her desk. A corner of paper, loosened during the walk back, had slipped slightly from between the pages. On it, in faded handwriting, he saw only 2 words before Emily covered it with her palm. Thomas Walker. Ryan saw the name for less than a second, but it stayed in front of him after Emily covered the page. Thomas Walker. Not Tom. Not Sergeant Walker. The full name, written in a hand that was not Emily's, small and uneven, as if the letters had been put down under pressure or with the last of someone's strength. Ryan faced forward again, but the debrief no longer reached him cleanly. Major Reeves continued speaking about route discipline and decision points, yet every word seemed to pass through water. Ryan knew his father's name from certificates, memorial programs, engraved plaques, and the stories people chose to tell a grieving boy. He knew the official version. Master Sergeant Thomas Walker had served with honor. He had placed his team above himself. He had not made it home. What Ryan did not know was why his name was inside Captain Emily Carter's field journal. When the debrief ended, the other officers stood slowly, chairs scraping against the floor. Some approached Emily with quiet nods, the careful kind given to someone whose competence had just become impossible to ignore. She accepted them without pride. Ryan stayed seated until the room thinned. Major Reeves gathered his papers at the front, watching without appearing to watch. Emily closed her training packet, slid the journal into her field bag, and moved toward the door. Ryan stood too quickly. "Captain Carter," he said. She stopped, but she did not turn at first. "Lieutenant." His voice came out lower than he expected. "Why is my father's name in your notebook?" The room seemed to lose its remaining sound. 2 officers near the coffee table paused, then decided not to stay. Major Reeves looked down at his papers, but did not leave. Emily turned around. The question had reached her, but not as an accusation. It had reached the guarded place behind her eyes, the place Ryan had noticed in the training lane when she looked toward the pine trees and saw something that was not there. "You should ask that in private," she said. "I am asking now." The old arrogance tried to rise again, but it did not fit him the same way. His voice broke slightly around the last word, not from weakness, but from the sudden fear that his entire life had been missing a page. Emily studied him for a long moment. He looked less like the officer who had thrown her journal and more like a son standing outside a closed door. She walked back to the table, set her field bag down, and removed the journal with both hands. She did not open it immediately. "Your father was a good man," she said. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Everyone says that. I am not everyone." The words were quiet, not harsh. Emily opened the journal near the center and turned past pages filled with names, dates, locations, weather notes, radio call signs, and short lines of handwriting that looked too personal to belong in any official report. Ryan caught glimpses as the pages moved. "Kansas, Oregon, South Carolina. Tell my brother I kept his watch. Make sure my daughter knows I heard her song. Do not let them say I was afraid." Emily stopped on a page protected by a clear plastic sleeve. At the top was written Master Sergeant Thomas Walker. Ryan stepped closer without meaning to. His father's name sat above a timestamp, 0217, and beneath it were 4 words that made the room tilt inside him. Extracted under heavy pressure. Emily's fingers rested beside the entry, not on it. "He asked me for paper," she said. "I had this journal in my kit because I kept notes during evacuations. Times, names, messages, things that got lost when radios failed and reports became too clean." Ryan stared at the page. There was a folded note tucked beneath the sleeve, yellowed at the crease. He recognized nothing about it, yet somehow his body knew it mattered before his mind did. Emily looked at him, and for the first time that day, her voice carried the weight she had been holding back. "Your father did not leave silence behind, Lieutenant. Someone just never told you where his last words went." Ryan did not reach for the folded note. For the first time that morning, his hands stayed still because he was afraid of what they might disturb. Emily seemed to understand. She turned the journal slightly, so he could read without touching it. The classroom had emptied except for Major Reeves at the front and one instructor near the door, both silent enough to become part of the walls. Ryan leaned closer. The note was short, written in dark pencil on a torn piece of weatherproof paper. The letters were uneven, but the words were clear. "If my son ever meets Captain Carter, tell him I lived long enough to thank her. Tell Ryan I heard him at the Little League game, even when duty kept me away." Tell him being brave is not about standing in front. It is about standing where someone needs you most. Ryan stopped breathing for a moment. The room did not spin. It became painfully steady. The scratched tabletop, the smell of damp uniforms, the hum of the lights, the silver hawk patch on Emily's bag, all of it sharpened until there was no place for him to hide from the sentence. He had been 10 years old at that Little League game. His father had missed most of the season. Ryan had hit a weak ground ball in the 4th inning and run as hard as he could to first base, angry because the one man he wanted in the bleachers was not there. Later, his mother told him his father had called from overseas and asked about every inning. Ryan had never believed it fully. Children remember absence louder than explanation. Emily watched the memory cross his face. She did not interrupt it. He talked about that game, she said after a long silence. He said you slid into first, even though nobody slides into first. Ryan gave a small, broken laugh that did not become a smile. His eyes stayed on the note. He remembered that. He remembered everything he could. Emily's voice remained level, but the effort behind it was visible now. Names, birthdays, bad jokes, the way your mother packed handwritten Bible verses in his duffel, the old truck he kept promising to fix when he got home. Ryan looked up sharply. The blue Ford. Emily nodded. He said it sounded terrible, but never quit. He liked that about it. Ryan covered his mouth with one hand and turned away. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough that the last of his pride could leave without an audience. Major Reeves lowered his eyes. Emily closed the journal halfway, leaving the note visible. I was assigned to the evacuation team, she said. There were several men that night who needed messages carried back. Some made it into official letters. Some never left the paperwork chain. I kept copies because I had promised them I would. Ryan faced her again. His voice was smaller now, stripped of command, tone, and family name. Why did I never see it? Emily looked at the note for a long time before answering. Classified mission. Broken chain of custody. People rotated out. Reports were sealed, then summarized, then filed by people who were not there. Your father became a paragraph. I am sorry for that. The apology landed differently because it was not for something she had done. It was for something she had carried. Ryan looked at the journal, then at the woman whose notebook he had thrown across the floor like trash less than 2 hours earlier. He remembered her bending to pick up the pages. He remembered the tremor in her hand. He remembered saying real soldiers did not need diaries. Shame moved through him slowly, with no shortcut around it. Captain Carter, he said, and the rank sounded different now, heavier, earned. Did he suffer? Emily did not rush the answer. She respected the question too much to soften it into something false, but she also did not give him anything cruel. He was not alone, she said. He knew his team was safe. He knew his message had been heard. And before he closed his eyes, he said your name like it was the place he was trying to get home to. Ryan nodded once, but it took everything he had. Emily lifted the folded note from the sleeve and placed it in his hand. This belongs to you now, she said. Ryan held it carefully, as if paper could have a heartbeat. Ryan held the note with both hands, but he did not unfold it again. He had already read enough to feel its weight. Across from him, Emily Carter remained standing beside the table, one hand resting lightly on the closed journal, her face composed in the careful way of someone who had learned not to ask grief for permission before continuing the mission. Major Reeves finally stepped away from the front board and approached them. He did not look at Ryan first. He looked at Emily. Captain Carter was not listed in the public report, Reeves said. Most of the names attached to that night were withheld. The mission involved multiple units, multiple agencies, and enough confusion afterward that the clean version became easier for people to repeat. Ryan stared at the paper in his hands. The clean version, he said. Reeves nodded once. The version without the mud, the delays, the broken radios, the people who stayed behind to keep promises no official form had a box for. Emily's eyes remained on the journal. She did not seem comforted by the explanation. Ryan looked at her then, really looked, and began to understand why she had carried herself the way she did. The quiet was not distance. It was storage. She had been holding rooms full of last words, unfinished birthdays, hometowns, nicknames, apologies, and thank you notes that never belonged to her, but had somehow become her responsibility. The silver hawk patch on her bag no longer looked like decoration. It looked like a marker placed over sacred ground. My father thanked you, Ryan said. Emily gave a small nod. He thanked the team. No, Ryan said, his voice rough but steady. He wrote your name. For the first time, Emily looked away. It lasted only a second, but it revealed more than any story could have. I was the one close enough to hear him, she said. That is all. Major Reeves shook his head slightly. That is not all. The words were not loud, but they carried authority earned over years. She directed the evacuation after the lead medic was pulled to another group. She kept track of every man who came through that corridor. She documented every message. She stayed until the final transport was accounted for. Then she wrote the names again because she did not trust memory alone. Ryan closed his eyes. The insult from earlier returned to him in full, sharper than when he had spoken it. Real soldiers do not need diaries. He had said it with the confidence of someone who had never carried a stranger's last sentence across years. He opened his eyes and looked at Emily's hands. They were steady now, but he remembered the tremor when she had picked up his father's page from the floor. I threw it, he said. No one answered. He did not need them to. The truth did not require witnesses to become heavier. Emily slid the journal toward herself and brushed one thumb over the worn leather cover. You did not know what it was. Ryan swallowed. That does not excuse it. No, Emily said. It explains it. The difference stayed between them. Ryan looked down at the note again, then carefully placed it flat on the table, smoothing the fold with the side of his hand. He treated the paper as if the room had become a chapel. May I make a copy for my mother? He asked. Emily's expression softened, not into a smile, but into something close to relief. You can keep the original. I have the entry. Your family should have his words. Ryan shook his head slowly. Then I want you to sign the entry. Not for proof. For her. She should know the name of the person who brought this back. Emily hesitated. For years, she had kept herself out of the center of those stories. She had believed the messages mattered, not the messenger. But Ryan was not asking for a medal or a ceremony. He was asking for a missing piece of his family history. Major Reeves placed a pen on the table. Emily picked it up, opened the journal to Thomas Walker's page, and beneath the entry wrote her name in small, precise letters. Captain Emily Carter. Ryan watched every stroke. When she finished, he stood at attention, not stiff with pride this time, but steady with understanding. Ma'am, he said quietly, I owe you an apology in front of every officer who saw what I did. Emily closed the journal. Then make sure it is not about your shame, she said. Make it about what they need to learn. The officers returned to the classroom after the midday break with a different kind of quiet. Word had moved through them without needing to become gossip. Something had happened between Lieutenant Ryan Walker and Captain Emily Carter, and whatever it was had changed the way Ryan carried himself. He no longer entered first. He no longer filled the room before anyone asked him to speak. He walked to the front table, placed his folder down, and stood beside it with his hands at his sides. Emily sat in the back again, the field journal closed in front of her, the silver hawk patch on her bag turned toward the aisle. Major Reeves gave no introduction. He simply looked at Ryan and nodded. Ryan faced the room. For a moment, he saw what he had missed that morning. The officers were not an audience. They were people who would one day make decisions when someone else was tired, confused, frightened, or depending on them. He had wanted their respect before he had earned the right to teach them anything. Now he held a folded note in his pocket, and its weight corrected his posture better than pride ever had. This morning, I disrespected Captain Carter, Ryan said. His voice was steady, but no longer polished. I treated something she carried like it had no value because I did not understand it. That was not confidence. That was ignorance wearing a uniform. No one moved. Emily lowered her eyes, not to avoid the apology, but to let him finish without rescuing him from it. Ryan continued. I also failed my team during the lane because I protected my plan instead of the people inside it. Captain Carter stepped in and did what I should have done. She saw the person first, the route second, the clock third. Major Reeves watched from the wall, silent. Ryan turned slightly toward Emily. Ma'am, I apologize for what I said, for what I did, and for what I assumed. You owed me nothing. You still gave my family something we should have received years ago. Emily looked up then. The room did not know the full meaning of his words, but they felt the shape of them. She stood slowly, not to command attention, not to make the moment larger, just to meet accountability with dignity. Apology accepted, she said. Ryan nodded once, and the motion carried more respect than any salute he had given that morning. Emily picked up the journal and walked to the front of the classroom. She placed it on the table where everyone could see the worn cover, the frayed edges, the careful repairs along the spine. "This is not a diary," she said. "It is not a trophy, and it is not a place where I keep myself important." Her hand rested beside the cover, not on top of it. "It is a record of people who were important before the paperwork made them small. Names matter. Details matter. The person who slows your movement may be the reason you remember your purpose. The person you dismiss may be carrying the lesson that saves your team." The officers listened with the stillness that comes when a room knows it is being given something it did not earn. Emily looked at Ryan, then back to the class. Respect is not demanded by rank, inherited through a last name, or proven by the loudest voice in a crisis. Respect is earned in the quiet choices. Who you protect, what you remember, how carefully you handle what someone else gave their life to preserve. Outside, the fog had lifted from the training field. Sunlight stretched across the pine line and touched the classroom windows in pale bands. Ryan reached into his pocket and felt the folded note, not to read it again, but to remind himself that legacy was not a monument behind glass. It was a standard waiting to be met. When the next exercise began, he did not rush to take command. He listened first. He asked where the casualty would be moved. He checked the rear security position himself. And when one of the younger officers dropped a notebook near the door, Ryan bent down, picked it up carefully, and handed it back like it mattered. Emily saw the gesture from across the room. She did not smile, but something in her eyes eased. Some lessons did not arrive with thunder. Some came on worn paper, in a father's handwriting, carried for years by a woman no one had thought to thank.